Have a look at what the French newspapers are saying today. Obviously, a day of high emotion. Joining me here on set is Emma James. No surprise, really. Only one story in the papers, isn't there?
Absolutely. Starting with Le Figaro, their headline is La France debout, France on its feet, basically. The photo is from the Place de la République, of course, where we saw all those people gather yesterday. Their estimate is that 3.5 million people were out across the whole of France, 1.5 million in Paris. I think that's probably a little conservative. Later on in the day, the numbers were considerably higher, and I don't think we'll ever know the exact number of people who were out on the streets because the police said that it was just impossible to count because there were so many of them. They were taking to the side streets, and really we'll probably never know just how many millions or hundreds of thousands of people were out on the streets. The editorial in Le Figaro talks about how the emotion that followed last week's attacks has now turned to courage, and that as France mourned, the country has stayed dignified in its anger. Le Figaro says the world paid tribute to the 17 victims, standing shoulder to shoulder, whatever country people were from, and regardless of race or religion. Further inside the paper, it also raises some questions, though, about the presence of some controversial figures in that the head of state's march. It's the only thing really that there seems to have been any disagreement on. Certain people saying that there were people there from repressive regimes who don't believe in freedom of speech and freedom of the press, so what on earth were they doing marching in memory of Charlie Hebdo and obviously calling for press freedom and freedom from terror?
And one word in particular you found seems to be reverberating, if you like, across the front pages.
Yes, Daboo. If we take a look at La Croix, they use Daboo alone on its front page, and basically it translates as standing or on your feet, and it's been a popular choice in the newspapers, no doubt because of the often quoted remarks from Stéphane Charbonnier, Charb, the editor-in-chief and cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo, who of course died in those attacks last week. And when the magazine was firebombed back in 2011, he gave a very defiant response to that, saying that he would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. So Daboo is really becoming quite a theme in reporting this story. Lacroix says the immense crowd braved the fear and the hate to march together, the 17 victims as diverse as those who gathered to remember them. And in 20 minutes, or 20 minutes, they also feature the same one-word headline, Daboo, with a photo from the Place de la République. The venue for this gathering really couldn't have been more appropriate. And if you're wondering what that statue is, because not too many people bother to look up these things, they just say, oh, that's very impressive. It's actually Marianne. She's the symbol of the French Revolution. And holding in her hands, she holds an olive branch in one and the rights of man in the other. So really reflecting all of the values that people wanted out there on the streets yesterday, peace and human rights.
It was incredible to see. I actually live right by the Place de la République, and just walking out from my flat and seeing all the people there, it was just such an emotional day, wasn't it? I mean, how is that being reflected in the papers?
Liberacion's headline is "We are one people," and I think that really did come across very much so in all of the coverage that we saw yesterday. People taking to the streets and wanting to stand with whoever. I saw one particular photograph of two gentlemen together, and they'd obviously prepared these boards that they had hanging around their necks, and one said, "I'm a Jew and I love Muslims," and the other one said, "I'm a Muslim and I love Jews."
Sure.
And it's that kind of atmosphere really that captured the imagination of the entire world. I mean, I don't think any rolling news channel around the world was doing anything other than watching what was happening in Paris yesterday. But Liberacion says in its editorial that it was a magnificent spirit seen on the streets, with a range of emotions on display from hope to grief. It described how the remaining members of the Charlie Hebdo editorial team led the march, devastated in tears, and as they put it, swept along by a sea of solidarity as they were applauded from the pavements and the balconies here in Paris. Families and colleagues of the victims led more than 40 heads of state from across the globe on that march.
Emma, great to have you with us today, looking at the newspapers. Emma James, delving through the newspapers for us on what is a very emotional morning here in Paris, of course, after a very emotional weekend as well.